Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Hope your day is off to a good start. Mine is so far. I've got a second cup of coffee here in one of my favorite mugs. This is handmade by my better half. It's my favorite one of the mugs at the house. And if you're like me, sometimes coffee tastes better if it's in the right mug. Like I've been doing the last 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to pop the hood on another Bible translation today. And like I've mentioned each week, I can't tell you what translation is best for you. I'm just going to give you my assessment on some of them. Some of the straightforward objective fact, and others just sort of my own subjective opinion. There's no one right translation. It's a matter of which one works best for you and what you're using it for, and hopefully at the end, if you need to buy a Bible, you'll have more information to go on. So for today, I'm gonna look at the NRSV. These Bible translations really are sort of an alphabet soup. NRSV, New Revised Standard Version. One of the things that really we need to remember is that most Bible translations come from a family tree and have something as a starting point. And that's very definitely the case with the NRSV today, and also the ESV that I'll look at next week. They've got a starting point, and this translation and the ESV for next week, both they're in the King James family. So how does that family tree work? They've got the King James version that we all know and love. In like 1886, 1887, something like that, there was the Revised Version. That was a revision of the King James that was done in Great Britain, and a few years later a sister translation did, the American Standard Version, that was very, very similar, done here in the US in I think 1901. Then the American Standard gave birth to or led to the Revised Standard Version, done in I think 1952, and then the Revised Standard Version leads to the New Revised Standard, and a few years later from that, the English Standard Version. So in 1952, we have the Revised Standard Version that's published by the National Council of Churches, and that became the basis for the NRSV and the ESV. So a little bit about this translation. In fact, I've got an NRSV right here beside me. This is the Cambridge Annotated Study Bible version of said animal. Like most translations, it is the work of a committee of scholars. The best Bible translations are always that. They're the work of a pretty big committee of scholars who really are experts in the field of New Testament Greek, ancient Hebrew, and ancient manuscripts, who really are deep into that stuff. The NRSV, like most of the translations that I mentioned, come from a committee. When the NRSV was done, they had they used the best Greek manuscripts that were available, for the New Testament. They also could draw upon the Dead Sea Scrolls when needed to for the Old Testament, like the NIV did, which I mentioned last week. The New Revised Standard, one of the things that is noteworthy about it, and also about its parent translation, the Revised Standard, is some of the Old Testament prophecies it's not consistent throughout, but some of them aren't as messianic as what we might traditionally find. And I think the best example of that is Isaiah 7:14. We may know that well. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and thou shalt call his name Emmanuel. That's what we've grown up hearing. The Revised Standard and also the NRSV translate the Hebrew word there as young woman rather than virgin, and that is the correct translation of that is very much up as a matter of great debate and controversy, and they chose young woman rather than specifically saying that she was a virgin. Probably the biggest thing, the thing which was most significant about the NRSV when it was done 30 years ago, is the lengths that they went to use gender-inclusive language. This was the first translation that really emphasized gender-inclusive language when referring to people. And so here's how this plays out. Now, I did take Hebrew and Greek in seminary. I wasn't very good at either. I guess I was decent in Hebrew. I was terrible at Greek, but I remember a little bit. So both of those languages have terms that can be used to refer specifically to men, and they both have other terms that can refer to men or men and women / humanity in general. And Hebrew has Adam. We think of Adam and Eve, and Adam becomes almost a proper noun, but it's Adam, and Adam can mean a man or mankind / humanity. It can be either one. And Hebrew also has the term ish, which is much more specifically man. And Greek is similar. Greek has anthropos, and which can be either man or humanity at large, and it has aner, which is much more specifically man, as in a male. And so when you get to translating into English, how do we do that? When we come across Adam in Hebrew, do you translate that as mankind or men, or do you use humankind or human beings or humanity? And equivalent with the equivalent terms in Greek. In Paul's letters, he so often he used the Greek term adelphoi, brothers, and so do you translate that? And literally, in all Paul's letters, you're just going to say brothers, my brothers. Are you going to translate that literally and just do brothers, or will you use sort of the older term brethren? Or will you use brothers and sisters, assuming that Paul is referring to both men and women in the ancient church that he's writing to? And in the case of the NRSV, they've pretty much always used brothers and sisters, and most of the time that is perfectly fine, because the term adelphoi, it can mean, that depending on usage, it can be referring specifically to male siblings, or it can be used in an inclusive sense. And so assuming that Paul is using it sort of in the inclusive sense, translating it as brothers and sisters, is perfectly fine. Most of the time, when the NRSV uses gender inclusive language, it doesn't change anything. It's a matter of it was a matter of preference and a matter of importance to that committee for the audience they're trying to reach. The NRSV is going to, if you visit any mainline Protestant denomination, be it United Methodist or PCUSA, Episcopal Church, or Lutheran churches, chances are the NRSV is going to be your pew Bible. Not always, but probably the better than even chance that if you visit any of these churches, the pew Bible is going to be in NRSV. The NRSV is just very widely used to be sort of a Protestant translation. It's remarkable in that it's even gotten the official seal of approval from the Vatican. So there are actually Roman Catholic editions of the New Revised Standard Version. It's become sort of a standard go-to translation in an awful lot of seminaries. So here's my own take on this translation. Like with the NIV, I don't use the NRSV a lot. I end up looking at it some just to see how a particular word is translated. How, like, if I'm just out of curiosity, how a particular word is translated, I can, with computer software, I can look at any number of different English translations to see how each one renders a particular verse or a particular word, and so the NRSV gets one. I look at it for that purpose, but it's not one that I use a lot just to read from. So my own take on it, and based on what I've read, and also some reading in it, the biggest thing with the NRSV is that it uses gender inclusive language for people, like I referred to a few minutes ago. And that was, when that was done 30 years ago, that was really controversial. Either you loved it or you hated it. That idea 30 years ago was like Notre Dame football. You either love them or you hate them, or the New York Yankees, you love them or you hate them. And in the years since then, other translations have hedged that way a little bit, but none nearly, but most of them not to the extent that the NRSV has. The NRSV, like I said, is very commonly used in more mainline circles, not so common in evangelical / conservative circles. This translation tends to be a little more literal than the NIV. I looked at the NIV last week, and the NRSV, it tends to be a little more literal than the NIV, takes a few less liberties. Again, you can't say that it's a better translation or that it's a worse one, but just that their idea going in, that their goals going in, translation philosophy is a little bit different. They had this, I thought it was pretty interesting, pretty clever saying as a translation philosophy, that they wanted to be as literal as possible and as free as necessary. And that ain't bad. They wanted to be as literal as possible, but as free as necessary. So you've got a translation which is sort of in the King James family, and you get that in some of the cadence, some of the rhythm of the writing when you read it. But it is much more contemporary language. It's very contemporary language, a little more literal than the NIV, a little more, not a lot. Probably not quite as readable as the NIV. In general, I think that the NRSV handles the poetry a lot better than the NIV. One of my gripes with the NIV is that when I read the Psalms, and there's like they don't even realize that they're translating poetry, and the translators of the NRSV do that better. One of to me, the greatest weakness of the NRSV, and this is a personal thing, the greatest weakness comes from what many might consider to be its strength, and that's how it handles being truly gender inclusive. So it's not so much a matter of can you accurately say brothers and sisters instead of brothers, but it's a matter of how you carry that out. And to me, they on a lot of occasions, they probably would have done well to have really thought more carefully about how to artfully render what they wanted to say into English. Over and over again in the Psalms, they, instead of using man or whatever other more archaic term, they use the term humankind. And it's a perfectly good word, but in the Psalms, it's not a poetic term, and so you're reading along, and it's not bad poetry at all, and there's like, do what? And that's how it strikes me. It's a sort of a hard stop word. It doesn't quite fit if you're reading poetry. And again, that's a subjective thing. I think they probably could have used humanity and accomplished the same thing, and been something slightly more poetic. And I'm going to read another case that is probably even worse. This is from Matthew 18, and Jesus is talking to his disciples about how to handle people who have sinned within the church. And I'm going to read this to you. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of two or three witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. And that rendering, is as I read it, is like you go from reading gospel and holy scripture to reading from a legal treatise or a legal document. In another case where the translators really should have thought more carefully about how do we make this sound like scripture? How do we make this into good English? And that is a subjective opinion. So again, my own opinion, it's a very good translation. It's a very good translation, a little more literal than the NIV that we talked about last week. Maybe not quite as easy to read, but a little more literal. If gender-inclusive language is a matter of importance to you, then definitely pick up a copy if you're looking for a Bible. I think the greatest weakness is how it handles the gender and how it handles translating for gender inclusivity. It's used a lot in a lot of seminaries. If you're looking for a Bible that'll be good for Bible, that'll be good for study. You could do a whole lot worse than picking up an NRSV. So anyway, that's my own two cents worth on the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version. Next week, I'll look at a cousin or sister translation, if you will. And y'all hope y'all have a great rest of your day.